Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm Mayor MacArthur, Art and Cultural Director of Japan House Los Angeles. Today, we're very excited to have our special guest, Josephine Rout, Japan Curator at the Victoria&Albert Museum in London, for our second webinar relating to the current exhibition, Kumihimo, the Art of Japanese Silk Braiding. Her lecture today will explore the use of kumihimo as details and accessories in Japanese fashion, both traditional and contemporary. But before we meet our guest, I'd like to introduce President of Japan House LA, Yuko Kaifu, who will say a few words of welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello, everyone. It is our great pleasure to welcome all of you to today's exciting webinar. Our current exhibition, The Art of Japanese Silk Braiding by Domyo, introduces kumihimo, braided silk cords that have been made in Japan for over 1,400 years. The exhibition was organized by Domyo, a company based in Tokyo who has been handmaking silk braids since 1652, close to 400 years. And our exhibition explores the history of Japanese silk braiding, the structure of the braids, as well as new innovations in braiding. Today, our guest speaker, Josephine Rout of Victoria&Albert Museum in London, is participating from UK, and she will guide us through some of the beautiful ways that kumihimo have been used as accessories and details in both traditional and contemporary Japanese fashion. She will also talk a little bit about kumihimo elements incorporated into European dresses. I'm sure this would be a fascinating look at the many ways these exquisite silk braids have enhanced Japanese fashion over so many years. And I truly appreciate Josephine for agreeing to speak to our audience today from London, which is like at 1 a.m. Currently. So truly, thank you, Josephine. Now I would turn it back to Mayor, who is going to officially introduce our speaker. So I hope everybody would enjoy today's program. Mayor, back to you.
Thank you, Yuko. First, I'd like to go over some housekeeping. So if you would kindly turn your attention to the screen. First of all, everybody is muted for this webinar and all videos are turned off, but feel free to engage with each other using our chat function. But if you have any questions for our guests, please use the Q&A function and not the chat function, and we will get those questions to our speaker. And if you could please submit your questions in English, that would also be very helpful. You'll all have noticed that this webinar is being recorded and it's going to be posted at a later date on our website. So you can watch it again at a later date and share it with others. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Josephine Rout. Now, Josephine is a curator at the Victoria&Albert Museum in London, where she looks after the Japanese collections of Meiji, modern and contemporary fashion, design, and metalwork. She's a graduate of the University of Canterbury, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and of the Royal College of Art in London. At the Victoria&Albert Museum, she was assistant curator for the refurbishment of the Toshiba Gallery of Japanese Art, which I remember well. And she curated the Friday Late Neo-Nipponica event and was project curator of the exhibition Kimono, Kyoto to Catwalk. Her first book, Japanese Dress in Detail, which was published in 2020, was shortlisted for the 2021 Association of Dress Historians Book of the Year Award. She's joining us today from London, where it is the early hours of the morning. Thank you so much for being with us, Josephine. It's great to see you, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Mayor, and Kaifu-san, and to the Japan House team for all your work in putting on this event tonight and the fabulous exhibition presented by Domyo. I just wish I was there in person to be able to see such an inspiring show. But I'm really honored to be here tonight to talk to you all about kumihimo in Japanese dress. So, with a history spanning over 1,400 years, Japanese braided cords, or kumihimo, are an enduring detail of Japanese fashion, often reflecting the political, economic, and social conditions of their time. Just like the myriad designs and techniques used to make kumihimo, these braided cords have been adapted and incorporated into a broad range of sartorial styles, from imperial court dress to an essential part of the kimono ensemble, and are now being reinterpreted by a new generation of creatives in exciting and provocative ways. In this webinar, I will attempt to braid these stories together. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it, to show that while the use and applications have changed over the years, kumihimo are an essential part of Japan's dress history and future fashions. Reverence for and appreciation of braided cords extends back to the Kofun and Asuku periods, so from the 3rd to 7th centuries. Many of the surviving Haniwa figures, such as this example from the British Museum, have proto-kumihimo as part of their ensembles, while early depictions of Prince Shotoku show him wearing Chinese-style dress, court dress, with braided silk cords around his waist, thereby aligning him with the introduction of this technique from the continent to Japan. Some of the earliest use of silk braids for clothing was court costume, which were codified and continue to be worn for ceremonial occasions today. For men, the most formal style is the sokutai, and this elegant pair of hakama would have been part of such an ensemble, worn over an inner pair of hakama, but underneath layers of long upper garments, or ho, made from white silk woven with roundels of wisteria and lined with red silk. They feature double-laced kumihimo to reinforce the side seams and conceal the opening at the crotch. Pairs of cords elaborately knotted at intervals decorate the long waistbands. While subtle and perhaps not visible when worn, they are both functional yet suitably decorative for such a high-status garment. More conspicuous use of kumihimo can be seen on another type of court costume known as kariginu, or hunting cloth. This style has cords which are threaded through the large sleeve openings, so they could be gathered up, drawing a bow on horseback. But as these examples date from when kariginu were no longer worn for hunting, but had become the everyday wear of high-ranking court nobles, this function was unlikely to have been employed. However, we can see how either contrasting or complementary coloured cords were used, adding texture to what can initially appear to be flat garments. Kumihimo were also used for dress accessories, such as headwear. On the right, we have a style of court hat for men known as a kazaori eboshi, which has purple kumihimo to secure it under the chin. On the right is quite a different style altogether, a fire hood for a woman of samurai rank, which has kumihimo to fasten the front flap over the nose and mouth to protect her from smoke. The wearing of such a luxurious garment during an emergency also indicated that she was a woman of high rank in need of rescue. Indeed, it was the samurai, the warrior class, who ruled Japan from the 12th to the mid-19th century, who really drove the demand for and development of kumihimo through their liberal use of braided cords for arms and armor. A single suit for a high-ranking samurai required 200 to 300 meters of cord, while the lacing process, odoshi, is one of the most important techniques for their construction. Early styles, such as the o-yoroi, or great harness, were designed for battles by cavalry, with the bow and sword as principal weapons, and incorporated many small plates of lacquered leather or iron laced together in rows. This provided the flexibility needed for fighting from horseback, while the smooth covering of deerskin across the front prevented snagging of the bowstring. Within this suit, as with many others, at least 7 different types of kumihimo have been used, including alternating brown and tan for the main panels, with borders of patterned and vermilion kumihimo, and then thicker, flat braids at the neck and shoulders, including one with a striking tortoiseshell pattern. As a symbol of high status, every detail of a suit of armor was integral to the wearer's identity and provide great detail to the styles of their time. As warfare moved from cavalry to massed ranks of foot soldiers, armor styles changed and became lighter and more flexible, thus incorporating even more kumihimo. This style is known as haramaki, or belly wrapping style, a form that dates from the beginning of the 15th century. The haramaki type of armor differed from the oyoroi in that it fastened at the back. As you can see, it has copious amounts of inky blue kumihimo, bordered by patterned cords in purple, green, white, and black, and then pure vermilion. This suit, like many others, was reassembled during the Edo period, which is 1615 to 1868, and it was a time of peace when samurai only wore armor for ceremonial purposes and as a sign of their military heritage. This suit of armor, which is mounted on an ikiningyo, or living doll, has a solidly riveted cuirass, more similar to European styles of armor, but still has the lavish amounts of kumihimo, including the stunning agemaki trefoil knot at the back. This prevented the shoulder guards slipping when bending forwards, but were also believed to protect the wearer from harm. The symbolic status of cords in Japanese armor is further confirmed in the Japanese proverb, which is to tighten the strings of the helmet after winning the war, reinforcing the importance of kumihimo in the way of the samurai. In addition to such fine suits of armor, high-ranking samurai would wear surcoats or jimbauri, made of rare and exotic materials. This example of imported wool is lined with silk brocade, trimmed with stencil-dyed deerskin and pale blue kumihimo, a fitting final touch to this opulent garment. The samurai were the only members of society permitted to wear swords, and while the blade is the most important part, it was the mounting that allowed the owner to express their style and taste. This sword is such an example, as while the blade dates from around 1420, it was remounted in the late 18th century. The stunning tortoiseshell pattern of purple, white, and black is a bold and striking contrast to the lustrous gold lacquer and prevents abrasion to this expensive coating when the sword was worn with full armor. Even the name of this type of sword, the ito maki no tachi, or cord-wrapped slung sword, emphasizes the importance of kumihimo. Few examples of men's fashion from the Edo period survive, but we are able to gain a sense of what was worn through prints from the kabuki theatre. Men's dress was relatively plain compared to that of women's, but featured kumihimo as ties for howdy jackets, which were worn over kimono. While the samurai may have been at the top of the social hierarchy, the rising wealth of the urban merchant class during the Edo period saw a shift in terms of social influence, particularly in regards to fashion. Merchants who were unable to change their social status were able to show off their economic superiority, conspicuous consumption of luxury goods. They became the major drivers of fashion, both as producers and buyers, while actors from the kabuki theatre were their style icons. While howdy had initially been worn by samurai, by the Edo period, they were worn by all urban men of means and distinction. Here we have actors wearing them both on and off the stage. The print to the right rather appropriately showing some famous actors announcing their return to the stage after recovering from measles. Although the ruling Tokugawa government attempted to curb such flagrant subversion of the social hierarchy by issuing various sumptuary laws to limit who could wear what, dress accessories became a way to subvert them. Small and discreet items such as inro and netsuke were a way for fashion-conscious men to show off their taste and wealth. The lustrous and colourful kumihimo enhanced the beauty of the inro and added detail to otherwise sober ensembles. Kumihimo were also used to decorate charm bags, which were used for amulets, the knot in itself an auspicious symbol. Although today the most prevalent use of kumihimo in dress for women is as an obijime, a cord used to secure the obi when worn with kimono, It was only at the very end of the Edo period that it was adopted for this use. Until then, silk braids featured as a motif, such as in these designs by Hishikawa Motonobu, or on this sumptuous kimono, which has embroidered decoration imitating Kumihimo. There are various arguments as to how and when the obijime became an essential part of the kimono ensemble. But as with most fashions of the Edo period, the origins lie in the floating world. The kabuki theatre was a veritable fountainhead for sartorial trends. While most of these, such as dye colors and patterns, were blatant product placement by the garment merchants, who sought to capitalize on the celebrity of the kabuki actors to sell their wares, the wearing of obijime was initially utilitarian. It was used to secure the bulky costumes, and these kind of proto-obijime were likely made of thin pieces of cotton sewed into a tube, rather than silk cord. And this is certainly evident in prints from this period, many of which show actors in costume with obijime. Another theory is that Edo geisha, who were the ultimate fashion influencers, sparked this trend by wearing obijime to mark the first crossing of the arched bridge at Kameido Tenjin Shrine. While this was keenly emulated by fashion-conscious townswomen, it is likely that once again there was a practical reason behind this. During the Edo period, the obi gradually widened and lengthened, partly in reaction to the sumptuary laws, which did not pertain to obi. Commoners were thus able to spend money on their waist sashes, but needed extra support to secure their obi in place. While this print on the right is a metate or parody picture of the classic tale of Genji, I just had to include it, as Ona Sanomiya is not only depicted wearing obijime, but her sleeves are lavishly bound with silk braid, and her cat appears to be on a Kumihimo leash, perhaps the ultimate fashion accessory fit for a princess. While obijime were increasingly becoming part of the kimono ensemble, the Haitore Edict of 1876, which abolished the wearing of swords, saw many artisans lose a vital stream of income. Kumihimo makers were amongst those affected and had to find other ways to apply their craft and gain new customers. Unlike metalworkers, who had to make quite different objects, the versatility of Kumihimo meant that it was quite easily adapted to other uses. During the Meiji period, so 1868 to 1912, many wealthy urban men had started to wear Western tailoring. Most Japanese women continued to wear kimono. However, there were significant changes. It became more streamlined from the styling of the Edo period, as women led gradually more public lives, necessitating the kimono being more functional. In addition, women started wearing outer garments that had been previously associated with men, such as haori, capes, and overcoats, all of which also incorporated kumihimo in their fastenings. And in this print, which is actually at Kameido Tenjin Shrine, we see this variety of dress styles, with most women wearing obijime, but also haori and capes, and then you can see men wearing this kind of mix of Western and Japanese dress. Japanese makers and merchants had also started actively seeking foreign markets. Shino Shobe opened a shop in Yokohama in 1859, the year this treaty port was established, and after realizing how popular his wares were with foreigners, started exporting silk garments and accessories to Europe and America. The styles he produced were Western in form, but were made from Japanese silk with colorful embroidery and kumihimo as fastenings. And you can see on this jacket, it's used not only as fastenings for the jacket, but also as a tie for the trousers. Not only was there foreign interest in Japanese silk goods, but in Japanese dress styles, such as the kimono. At the beginning of the Meiji period, many merchants sold off kimono that had been in stock for women of samurai class. But with the social reforms and abolishment of samurai as a class, they no longer had a need for these, and so they exported them, causing a kind of global kimono craze. By the end of the Meiji period, in the early 20th century, Japanese merchants were producing a hybrid style that they referred to as kimono for foreigners. These garments differed in that they were often made of heavily embroidered satin with gored sections so that they could be worn over petticoats, and a matching sash to secure them instead of an obi. These sashes were trimmed with silk cords that were knotted and tasseled, while some export kimono have silk cord trim on the sleeve openings. And you can just slightly see that on the edge of this sleeve in the detail shot. It was around this time that the kimono started influencing the shape of Western women's fashion. Known as the forme japonaise, this new tubular style with V-shaped neckline and high sash detail was radically different from the tightly corseted and bustled styles that had been in vogue just decades before. In this example, by the British designer Lucille, there is even braided silk cord detailing on the sash, likely a nod to the export kimono. In Japan, the Kumihimo as obijime was well and truly part of the kimono ensemble, with most images from the early 20th century depicting women wearing them. For our exhibition, Kimono Kyoto to Catwalk, we sought to recreate the style of this poster from 1935. This advertisement for Mason Kimono features film actress Mizutani Yauko wearing a kimono with wave patterns similar to this one from the Kalili collection. However, we didn't have any of the accessories. With the help of Miss Yoshimoto Koka of Bunka Gakuen University, we went to a vintage kimono shop in Harajuku to select our obijime. As you can see from this mid-action shot, to actually tie an obijime requires considerable strain on the cord, which is why kumihimo are both the ideal material for this purpose, being strong yet elastic, but also why historic examples are scarce because they just cannot survive. As well as providing support to the kimono ensemble, the wide range of colors, patterns, and styles means that they are now an integral part of kimono grammar. This rule-bound way of wearing kimono started after the war, when the garment went from being an item of daily dress to something reserved for special occasions. Most people lost the ability to wear kimono themselves and had to rely on professionals to help them. These new experts managed to make kimono more complicated and intimidating than it had ever been by insisting wearers follow strict etiquette and ensure every detail was perfect. While this made the kimono more conservative, emphasis was placed on accessories such as the obijime, since they could make or break an outfit. What I find so interesting about such carefully coded dress is seeing the transformation of these individual elements when worn together as an ensemble. For example, this obijime of lime green, gold, and white in a diamond pattern does not initially appear to go with this kimono of more muted tones, and yet somehow they do when all put together. The more historic styling of bridal kimono, which can include a purse, fan, and dagger, offers other ways to incorporate kumihimo into kimono, providing added texture and movement. This is particularly the case with the shiromuku, or pure white version, as the monochromatic ensemble depends on such added detail and decoration, showing how kumihimo add extra three-dimensionality to what are often perceived as flat garments. Well, for much of the late 20th century, the kimono and kumihimo were only really worn for such ceremonial occasions, but this started to change in the 1990s. The financial crash in 1991, which saw the bursting of the economic bubble and placed Japan in deep recession, caused many to reconsider their attitude towards fashion. Secondhand clothing, recycling, and the concept of mottainai, or not to waste, became important consumer concerns, while a new generation started experimenting with fashion through outrageous street style. Pioneering this new look was Sawada Takuya of Harajuku brand Takuya Angel, established in 1995. With Takuya Angel, Sawada was attempting to create a new style that incorporated kimono elements with cyberpunk futurism. His radical take on Japanese dress naturally includes kumihimo, which in this garment is used as necktie and bag strap. Rather unexpectedly, the vibrant street style of areas such as Harajuku fostered a kimono fashion revival. This coalesced with the growing influence of the internet and social media, which in turn widened the sphere of influence. Akira Times, a self-taught photographer and stylist based in Yamagata, has been sharing his inventive kimono shoots online since 2008. His contemporary take on the Edo and Meiji styles sees him use kumihimo as an obijime to suspend his accessories from, including a pocket watch, mobile phone, and car keys. It is, of course, thanks to the internet that we were able to work with Akira to produce this striking image for Kimono Kyoto to Catwalk, which includes kumihimo threaded through a leather belt. The kimono revival has also produced an exciting array of new designers who approach the garment as an item of fashion rather than tradition. Perhaps most famous amongst these is Yoshiki and his brand Yoshi Kimono. Founder of the iconic band X Japan, Yoshiki was also the son of kimono merchants and brings a rock and roll edge to his kimono styling. In this ensemble, rather than being tied neatly and tucked carefully into itself, the purple and silver obijime is styled with the diamante obidome twisted together and elaborately knotted with the ends left to swing seductively. Kimono is now an essential part of subversive street style and is widely documented by the website tokyofashion.com. In the past few years, there has been highly imaginative reinterpretations of kimono, with most adherents wearing vintage and incorporating kumihimo in both traditional and unexpected ways. In this ensemble to the left, you can see how the kumihimo of the obijime and haori ties complements the stripes of the obi in this chic black ensemble with hints of red and white. While on the right, Ikumi's multicolored obijime accentuates the many hues of her floral kimono. The added bow at the back is in keeping with her maximalist style. These wearers show how kumihimo can be reinterpreted and incorporated with other forms of dress, such as comme des garçons on the left, with streetwear in the middle, or by using obijime as a necklace on the right. The boundless creativity of contemporary street style offering new futures for kumihimo. Such creative approaches are also being explored by artisan brands such as Domyo. Founded in 1652, Yusoku Kumihimo Domyo has an extensive history of making braided silk cords by hand. In addition to preserving the heritage of kumihimo, most notably by reproducing historical examples at the behest of the Office of the Josephine Imperial Household Agency, and for various temples, shrines, and museums throughout Japan. The Tokyo-based company also produces a wide range of dress accessories, such as neckties, hairbands, and earrings, showing how the beauty of kumihimo can be adapted and updated for modern life. Indeed, Tokyo's role as both a site of exceptional craft and a leading fashion city is the founding of the Edo Kidari project, which showcases traditional businesses that work with the concept of old meets new. One of these companies is Ryukubo, who have been making kumihimo for over 130 years. As well as reproducing and repairing kumihimo for temples and shrines, Ryukubo have also worked with European luxury brands on retail installations and designed ribbons for the 2019 Rugby World Cup medals. For Edo Kidari, they collaborated with Noritaka Tatehana, a leading contemporary artist and the exhibition director of the project. Famed for his avant-garde footwear, beloved by celebrities such as Lady Gaga, Tatehana has incorporated Kumihimo into his iconic heelless shoes. These are his kind of update on the high geta that were worn by courtesans of the Edo period. By adding the jewel-toned Kumihimo, these shoes combine Edo glamour with a cutting-edge fashion. Akira Hasegawa, whose work is displayed in the Japan House exhibition, is a garment modelist who takes vintage pieces and deconstructs them. By doing so, he's able to better understand internal structure of the garment and then recreate a new piece based on the original. For the exhibition, Hasegawa chose two historic European styles, a French military officer's jacket and Victorian dolman. Made from antique linen, the embellishments of Kumihimo with sashiko stitching. What I find really interesting about these is how reminiscent of Meiji hybrid fashion they are. The French military officer's jacket is similar in style to that adopted by the Meiji government, in order to project a modern image of political and military power, while the dolman was one of the styles first adopted by the Meiji Empress, when in 1886, she implored her fellow countrywomen to adopt Western styles made from Japanese materials. So by using Kumihimo as embellishments, Hasegawa's example is in some ways finally fulfilling her wishes. So while Japanese fashions have changed and returned, the appreciation and application of Kumihimo remains a continuous thread that is intertwined throughout history and extends into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine. I must say I appreciate all your Kumihimo puns. I do like.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
No, I enjoy that kind of humor as well. I know it's supposed to be the lowest form, but it's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for that journey through Japanese fashion history. It really is interesting to see all the different ways that these braided silk cords have been incorporated into different kinds of dress. You know, obviously we start with an image of a horse. So the horses themselves are also embellished with cords, these decorative cords. And we actually in the exhibition have an example of a replica of a beautiful sash that was probably worn over a horse's saddle. So even horses and cats, as you pointed out, were able to wear kumihimo over the centuries. But it strikes me as particularly interesting looking at your slides and listening to your talk that you know, when we see kumihimo today, they are gorgeous braided silk items. We mostly see them on women, but throughout most of Japanese history, kumihimo have been worn by men. And
exactly
as ties for courtiers' robes or as sashes to bring, you know, tie their robes together. And then by the samurai as a very integral part of their armor, and then for their swords. And then even till quite late on, they're worn by men to carry their inro and their smoking sets and their calligraphy sets, you know, suspended from their obi. And it's only in the late 19th century when the obijime, which is when, you know, the item that we kind of think of when we think of kumihimo, was worn as an important part of a woman's ensemble. So. And interestingly, that period when women were wearing kumihimo as a major part of their ensemble, that period was really short-lived. And so
exactly,
here we are 100 years on from that, and women really haven't worn kumihimo very much. So that's what, you know, it struck me throughout your presentation, that they are essentially something that has been worn, you know, by men in Japan for much of history. And I'm wondering, you know, as an expert in Japanese fashion and sartorial trends, do you think that it is now, you know, now is the time when Japanese women might sort of take over? I mean, we see these shoes designed by men, but they're going to be worn by women. Men are not going to wear these shoes.
No, although that's a good question if he makes them in sizes for men. Because as you might have noticed, there's a tiny, tiny pair for a child. I can't imagine a child wearing them.
Right.
But yeah, what's so interesting is how easy it is to gender something and how easy it is to gender dress, and how you know, historically and even today it's seen as very important to do so, but by the same token it can also be just as easy to degender dress. And I think that's perhaps what we're really going to see more in the future of Japanese fashion, is more the continuation of what there is called genderless fashion, or what we might think of as kind of gender fluid, or kind of non-binary fashion. So I really think that's going to be the kind of next stage. And in fact, I'm going to have to quote the great master Yoji Yamamoto himself, because when he was asked to do an exhibition with Chiso, who's a Kyoto-based kimono company, one of, you know, very old one, who produced, you know, beautiful yuzen dyed kimono. He did an exhibition with them looking at the past, the present, and the future of the kimono. And for him, the future was genderless, non-binary fashion. And that really is a big thing on the streets in Tokyo, with the kind of younger generations. And then also when you kind of look back to the Edo period, you know, whilst in the world of the samurai, which was, you know, very codified, and very fixed, for, you know, political reasons. But in the world of, you know, in the floating world of the kabuki theatre, gender was way more fluid. And fashions, you know, when we were doing the exhibition, we were trying to find, you know, kind of flashy kimono that would have been worn by young men, wakushu. And it was really hard to determine, you know, was this for a man? Was this for a woman? Could it be worn by both? So what I think will be interesting is kind of return to that more free notion of gender and dress and fashion. So I'm sure Kumihimo can be part of that.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's a very good point, that this sort of the gender fluidity that goes back to the Edo period in Japan for sure. And yeah, I think we'll see kimono being very non-binary, and whatever accessories go along with the kimono would join that trend.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is if you look at most of the kind of prints of, you know, the bijinga, the beautiful woman, you can't actually see the obijime. I really had to search through our collection to find them, and they really are, you know, just in the 19th century. I couldn't find any earlier. But in kind of the kind of current fixed mode of wearing kimono for men, they don't wear obijime. But as you'll see in Akira Times, he had one. So he says about wearing kimono is that you have to know the rules in order to break them. So I think he's kind of knowingly adding that that to kind of subvert the old rules. But yeah, it's sorry, I've lost my train of thought. But yeah, and also with a lot of these new designers, like Hiroko Takahashi and Jotaro Saito, they are kind of consciously making what they think of as unisex kimono. So yeah, the accessories, I think obi still tend to be quite gendered, with women's ones being much thicker and the knots more complex than men's. Women's usually worn higher, men's quite low in the waist. But it'd be interesting to see, you know, how and if that changes.
Interesting. I've got a few questions coming in now, so I better let the audience ask some questions and not just steal all the questions myself. So we've, one of the questions is, has the number of Kumihimo makers dwindled over time, or are they holding steady?
I think, unfortunately, with almost every type of Japanese craft, they have dwindled, probably to a very depressing number. But I think those that are kind of preserving and pushing on, like Domyo and Dukubo, I think they're finding strength in what they do, and finding new ways to work with this their skills and their techniques. So problem when you look at Japanese craft industries, it's always depressing, because usually most of the artisans are quite old, a lot of them don't have apprentices, and there's this kind of fear that that they're just going to go extinct. But I kind of do have this hope. In some cases you'll see the kind of new generation who are taking it on, and I think that's the case with Domyo, and having kind of new perspective on their companies, and also I think there is, it's slow but sure, I think there is a shift in Japan with people who there's what's called the slow life movement, of people who are kind of wanting to move away from this very corporate, exhausting kind of Japanese business model that really served the kind of bubble years, but that kind of younger people don't want to work like that, and they don't want to live like that. So my hope is that they want to take up craft and instead. I'm not sure that's happening in the numbers that we need it to, but
well, it's possible that during the pandemic, a lot of people have been taking up crafts. I know in the United States that's been happening, and not just bread baking, but a lot of different slow, time-consuming crafts, and I'm sure that's been going on in Japan as well. We have a few questions relating to this, and one is, what kind of economic support do the traditional craft industries like Kumihimo receive from the government? Is that in their attempt to preserve cultural heritage? I know that there's a program, the Living National Treasures program, important cultural properties, these various government programs that help preserve art and also preserve artistic traditions and crafts. But
so the Edo Kadari project is supported by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. So there's support there. The problem with the not the problem, but one of the kind of issues with the Living National Treasure system is that while it's very good at preserving kind of those artisans at the very kind of top of their craft, and kind of very high end crafts, so for example use-in dyeing, what they don't do, and this is what is a problem, is they don't support the kind of wider ecosystem that a lot of these crafts depend on. So a kimono is not just a kimono, like it requires multiple steps and multiple people to make a single kimono. And then with a kimono you have all of these accessories that go with it, like kumihimo, and then the people who make the machines or the tools, and it's the problem is, if one goes, then the rest of it is kind of at risk and is affected. It's kind of like a rainforest. They all depend on each other. And the problem with the Living National Treasure system is it only protects the trees at the, the top of the rainforest.
Right. Yeah, it is a big issue. I've got a few questions here that are related to that and how well this tradition is continuing. I know that the numbers have been dwindling for makers of kumihimo, and it's to me miraculous that Domyo has survived as a company since 1652.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's very significant. That's over 350 years. And a big part of that survival is the ability to innovate.
Yeah.
And so, when you're innovating, you're looking for new markets, you're looking for new ways to to use your product. And so you can't be a purist, you have to adapt. And
Yeah.
so, there obviously Domyo-san and his company they are finding different ways. They're making neckties now, they're making earrings and bracelets.
I love the earrings. They're so good.
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
And available on their website.
Great.
And I think that other Kumihimo companies are doing that as well to help them survive. And I just wanted to point out from personal experience, when I was a student in Japan, I actually I stayed with a kimono making family in Kyoto, and my homestay dad took me to take some kumihimo classes. So I spent 3 days making kumihimo, and I made this necklace, which I'm showing.
Oh, fantastic.
I'm not bringing that up just to brag about my kumihimo skills.
No, I'm very impressed.
But the point is that a lot of these crafts makers, like the kumihimo makers, they are starting to teach the skills in a classroom environment. So they're keeping their skills alive by teaching them, as well as by making products and trying to sell them. They're turning into instructors of these important cultural skills and the cultural heritage. And I think that this is one way that they're helping. They're trying to preserve it. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Well, I was actually going to point out, I meant to mention it in my presentation. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to be in Japan to kind of bear witness to this, but I think the anime Your Name might have inspired a whole new generation of kumihimo.
Yes, there is a very important kumihimo bracelet in that movie that has triggered a lot.
Exactly, and the making of kumihimo in that, with her grandmother, and even just her wearing of kumihimo and her, in her hair as a daily accessory. I think this has probably really made a huge impact amongst teenagers. I would love to just see how many, high school students are wearing kumihimo.
Right. It's interesting. I've got a few questions about whether kumihimo always has to be silk. Traditionally it's silk, but some younger kids are probably making kumihimo out of other fibers as well.
Yeah, like I think synthetic fibers, I hate to say, have probably been used. And cotton. I think cotton has been used. But the best kumihimo are silk.
And
handmade, not machine made.
Right, handmade, right. And so that's the thing that's important about the Domyo kumihimo, is that they are handmade, and they're made with silk that has been hand dyed by the company as well. So that's something they're very proud of, that it's all very handmade and very labor intensive. So one of the things that's also difficult is that they are therefore expensive. And I'm getting a lot of people asking again what the name of that movie was.
Oh, the movie is Your Name.
And it's Kimi no Nawa in Japanese, and Your Name. And
yes, I think it was it 2016?
Something like that. It's a few years ago. It's a great movie.
It is a really good film. Yeah. I recommend it.
So we're getting a lot of questions again about the gender gender fluidity. It's a hot topic. And so one question is, does the gender fluidity go both ways? Did men wear garments that would be typically worn by women? And I guess the past tense of the question means during the Edo period, perhaps.
So men definitely wore women's dress, and so for example, wakashu, who were these kind of young, kind of flamboyant men, generally very wealthy, and didn't have any social responsibility, is one way of describing it. They wore kind of very flashy, flamboyant kimono that looked very similar to women's. They'd have very long sleeves, furisore, like young women's. And it's thought that they had relations with both men and women. And then, of course, you also have onagata, who were kabuki actors who specialized in women's roles and lived as women off stage as well. And they were kind of seen as the epitome of feminine style, but also kind of feminine grace. Their kind of deportment and mannerisms. But then also there were also, women samurai who went, not many, but some who did go to war.
And quickly, since we're on women and weapons, there was a question right up at the top of the the list of questions about, you showed a slide of wedding.
I know.
Wedding dagger. Can you explain why there would have been a dagger in that?
I can. I love it. So I only found out about this when we put this whole ensemble together for the exhibition, and I thought it was great because I thought, oh yeah, that might be for self-defense. She doesn't like her husband. Maybe she wants to kill her husband. But no, it's actually a kind of, it's a kind of hangover from samurai women's dress, in that high-ranking samurai would have a small dagger in case their castle was invaded, and they had to commit suicide before somebody could kill them. So yeah, sorry, it's not.
Yeah, it's a bit dark, but
it's a bit dark, and it's just kind of tradition and heritage now. But a wonderfully strange touch in bridal ensemble.
So I've got time for maybe a couple more questions. One of them is, to be kumihimo, are they specific braiding patterns that are used? And the exhibition sort of answers that question, but not everybody is able to see our exhibition, although we do have a virtual tour on our website. And
I highly recommend.
Yeah. So yes, there are many different braiding patterns that are used, but essentially there are three different types of braids. There's the flat braid. You can see some flat braids in my background here, and then there are round braids and square braids, and many types of each of those, and they're all, you have to learn the braiding order and the structure to be able to create those specific braids. I think I'm going to choose one more question. The relationship between sanadahimo and kumihimo. And do you know much about that? The ties, the kumihimo, and then ties for the tea ceremony boxes. I know that a lot of those cords are made of kumihimo, but they have a different function.
Yes.
Am I correct in that?
Yes, and I think I'm sorry, I really don't know much about tea, but I do know the kinds that you mean. I think also there are certain ways of tying to indicate either kind of what stage the tea ceremony there is, or if something is kind of empty or full, or there's a whole nother language.
Yeah, that's a whole nother webinar, isn't it?
Yeah. But the kind of symbolism and meaning of kumihimo and tea, it exactly could be a whole webinar.
I think we need to make a note of that as a possible webinar. And then somebody else is asking if you could do, if it might be possible to do a webinar on different kimonos and dyeing techniques, etc. Somebody else read your book and really enjoyed it. And,
thank you.
So I just want to mention that. I'm going to have to wind up our webinar. I don't know if that's a pun. I'll tie up our webinar.
That's a good one, yeah.
I'll tie up our webinar now. And thank you so much Josephine, for staying with us. It's 2 a.m. in London, so thank you so much. It was a gorgeous, fascinating lecture, and thank you everybody for all your great questions. A lot of them came sort of late, and I'm so sorry I couldn't get to them all. And I'd like to remind everybody that we have more webinars and programs coming up in the next few weeks, including our next webinar in the series, The Secrets of Business Sustainability, on Tuesday, February 22nd. And the guest will be Kiichiro Domyo of the Domyo Company of Kumihimo, who will discuss his company's success creating Kumihimo for over 350 years. So that should be a fascinating look at the business side of Kumihimo making. So please check that out on our website and register for that soon. And we will be holding, for those of you who live in the LA area, we'll be holding Kumihimo workshops on site at Japan House LA on Saturday, February 26th. And you'll be able to sign up for these workshops from this Friday on. We'll be opening up the registration for those. So come and learn how to braid these silk cords. And we will be providing silk made that is from Domyo. So it's the hand dyed silk, and you'll be able to make a beautiful braided Kumihimo bracelet. And to stay up to date on all of our events and programs, subscribe to the Japan House LA newsletter. And today, when you exit the program, please take a moment to fill out our survey so that we can continue providing content that's relevant to your interests. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. And a huge thank you to Josephine Rout for her wonderful talk today. Enjoy the rest of the day, everybody, and please stay safe. And thank you, Josephine. It was great.
Thank you so much, everyone.